my professors is like, you can't do that when you get into full-time ministry. You can't. So I just was always told that whole thing was reinforced. Like, you can't be yourself if you're going to do this.
Welcome to the Daron Earlewine podcast, where we awaken you to become who you were born to be. Here's your host, Daron Earlewine.
Got a big question here in episode 22. So right off the bat, let's hit you with this. Are you qualified for the calling God has placed on your life? Are you qualified? Short answer, here it comes. Get ready for it. No, you're not qualified. But hey, welcome to the party. None of us are. Welcome back to the Daron Earlewine podcast, episode 22. Crowd goes wild. Hey, we're in a new year. I don't know when you're listening to this one, but we're recording it right at the beginning of 2021. And has there ever been a year we're more happy, more excited to be in than 2021? And we want to thank you for joining us here on the Daron Earlewine podcast, whether it's on YouTube, Spotify, or whatever channel you download this from. And if you haven't had a chance yet, we would really, really appreciate it if you take a minute and give us a review or like or subscribe to the channel so we can get this great message out around the world. And that message is that you are created on purpose and for purpose, and that God is for you, not against you, and he's very near you, not far away from you. And I tell you what makes me happy is when I feel near to you. And one of the ways I feel near to you is when you reach out, send me an email or a text message so we can get to know what's going on in your life. You guys, thousands of you download the podcast every single month. But here's the struggle is we see you as numbers on a screen, but we don't get to know who you are. And I would love to get to know you a little more, get to know your story, get to know what God's doing in your life, ways we can pray for you, and ways that we can put content out over this next year that is more helpful, that is more awakening, that is more equipping for your life. And so please reach out to us, whether it's on Facebook. You can do that on Facebook, Instagram. You can email me directly at Daron, D-A-R-O-N, Daron at blackbirdmission.com, or you can text me 317-550-5070. Would love to get to know you and get to know who makes up this great Daron Earlewine podcast community. It means so much to me that you listen each and every week, and I would love to hear from you. Hey, this week, we're asking that question. Are you qualified for the calling God has on your life? And we're going to sit down with my great friend. He's a college roommate of mine. Another one. You're like, how many roommates did you have, Darren? Whether it was like a townhouse, had a bunch of them. And his name is Clint Dupin, and he is a church planner out in the East Town, East Bay area, around San Francisco. Just a really, really cool story. You're going to love it. We laugh a lot, probably too much. Clint's one of the funniest, wittiest, most sarcastic guys I know. I may have laughed more with him than maybe anybody in my life. And one of the things we're going to jump into right away when you listen to this podcast is the reality that Clint grew up in a family with a great lineage of ministry impact. He was sorry, I have to edit this. I have this all plugged in like we were getting ready to go on Facebook. That's not screwing up any of the recording, is it? You hear it in your ears? I hear it in my ears. And that's not getting audio anyway. So we're good. Yeah. Okay, cool, great. Didn't want to do this whole thing and do it wrong. It's recording, so yeah, that's just, okay. Clint came from a family with a great lineage of ministry impact. His grandfather, Clint Dupin, there's actually a statue of him on a university's campus. He was an evangelist that went around the world telling people about Jesus. His dad was a very successful church planner, grew a mega church when there weren't a lot of mega churches in the country. And so Clint grew up feeling like, do I fit in my family? Do I fit in my life? Because I don't want to do life or ministry the way they do it, and wasn't even sure where he fit. And we've had that theme multiple times here on the podcast, and I'm sure we'll have it multiple times in the future, because there's so often in our lives that we just don't feel like we fit in the environment or the place that we've been born, the family, the church, maybe the career that has been around our family. And that's one of the most difficult things to overcome, I think, in our life, is to feel that feeling like I fit and I make sense. And what that can do for us is it can get us to a place where if we are beginning to make some strides, take some steps towards discovering who God's created us to be, is we begin to feel very inadequate or unqualified for the calling that God has in our life. And that was the question that I started off, right? Are you qualified for the calling God has for your life? Well, the short answer to that, and it'll take away the sting of feeling like, I don't think I'm qualified. Let me just help you out. You're not, right? You are not qualified for the calling God has in your life. First and foremost, it's because what we're saying is that the holy, almighty, transcendent, amazing, creative God, like, are you qualified to be invited by him, right, to partner with him? No, you're absolutely not, right? I mean, theologically, the Bible tells us that we're actually sinners, right? And we're saved by grace, but that we can't even be in his presence without his grace. So the idea of being able to be qualified to be a partner or an ally or an ambassador of God, no, you're not qualified for that. Only God's grace actually allows you to be qualified to do any of it. So if you're feeling like, oh gosh, I don't know, I'm not as smart as my older brother, or I didn't do this, or I didn't graduate, with honors and blah, 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 blah. I don't think I can do the thing God's calling me to do. I don't think I can walk across the street and minister to my neighbor. I don't think I can lead a Bible study. I don't know if I can go back to college. I don't know if I can be a teacher. Whatever the thing is that you're sensing God maybe nudging you into, and you're like, I just don't know if I'm qualified. Just start here. You're not qualified. You're not qualified to partner with God, but God takes care of that. I found this quote all over the internet. It's accredited to a bunch of different people, but it's great. It's this, is God doesn't call the qualified, but he qualifies the called. And that's a really humbling but freeing place to be in, that whatever you sense God is inviting you into, you're not qualified for it. So take the pressure off you. But here's the good news, is that God does qualify the called. God is going to equip you and bring you everything you need to become who you were born to be. So if you are feeling inadequate in it, or insufficient, or unqualified, welcome to the party. We all do. You look through the whole Old Testament. Look at the whole Bible, for a matter of fact, right? Moses, I don't talk so well. Don't really feel qualified. It's cool. I'll take care of it, right? Leads the people of Israel out of Egypt. How about Gideon, right? God shows up and he's like, how are you doing, mighty warrior? And Gideon's like, I'm the smallest tribe, smallest family. We have nothing. Like, what are you talking about? What do you like? You see that in me, God? I am unbelievably unqualified to lead your people. Well, then God's like, the Gideon story, that we should do a podcast just on that, right? God's like, hey, you got too many people. Let's boil it down to almost nobody and we'll defeat the enemies. You got Matthew. I think about of so many of the disciples. Like, we think about these guys, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, blah, blah. We say their names and we're like, yeah, they're the disciples. These were regular dudes that were probably in their late teens that were invited by God himself to be his first draft picks. You think they felt qualified for this? Matthew was taking money from people as a tax collector and rejected by his people, and all of a sudden he's in the mix with Jesus, and he's like, "Yeah, you're going to be a disciple." Or how about Peter? Right, Peter, he was the ultimate talk before you think, react before you actually think about what's going on guy, and it got him in trouble all the time when he was actually Jesus' disciple, and it got him in trouble even after Jesus was back in heaven and he was leading the first church. Peter was unbelievably unqualified for what God invited him to do, to lead the first church ever, right, from Jerusalem. He didn't do it perfectly, but God took care of actually qualifying him because he was called, and you're called. And that's what we're going to jump into as you go through this episode and listen to Clint. You're going to laugh a lot, I hope. I know I did. And here's the truth about it. And it's the basis scripture, the foundational scripture for spiritual DNA. And when I read this, it's what gave me the kind of motivation to create spiritual DNA. And it comes from 2 Peter 1, 3 through 4. I'm reading from the Passage translation. It says this: everything we could ever need for life and complete devotion to God has already been deposited in us by his divine power. That's good news, friend, right? You say, I feel unqualified. I don't know if I'm as smart as this person, or I have this past, or I don't know if I can get past this, or I have this physical or emotional ailment, or whatever it may be. Here's the deal. God has created you on purpose and for a purpose. There's a call in your life, and God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. And this right here says this, that when you enter a relationship with Jesus and his spirit comes to life in you, you have been given everything you need for life and complete devotion to God, and it's already been deposited in you by his divine power. So if you're following Jesus, his Holy Spirit has filled your life and you're walking towards him, enjoy this journey with Clint Dupin and see how he felt unqualified, like he didn't fit in his family, but he stepped into the relationship with God step by step. And before you know it, he realized that God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called, and he has had everything he's needed and it was already in him to become who God created him to be. Enjoy this conversation with my good friend Clint Dupin. And we come back, I got one more thought for you right here on the Daron Earlewine podcast. Hey, I'm excited to sit down with one of my good friends, Clint Dupin. You're getting to know Clint maybe for the first time. I'm not. We were college roommates at Indiana Wesleyan University.
Harvard of the Midwest.
Anyway, we were college roommates, and we've done ministry together for the past 20 years in different ways and in shapes and forms. And Clint, right now you're planning a church in the Bay Area of California, and you guys have got that started here in the past 2 years, 3 years?
2 years.
2 years. And it's just, I'm stoked to have you on. Hopefully we can stay on task. That's no chance that you and I are doing that, but thanks for being on the podcast, dude.
Oh, man. Daron, love you, man. Thank you for asking me.
So Clint, what was funny, dude, is I remember meeting you before we were roommates. I remember meeting you. Played soccer at Indiana Wesleyan, played defense, right? Defense, yeah. Right? And
yeah, I had one job, just stay on that guy. If you get the ball, you get rid of the ball as soon as you can.
I just remember before I knew you, knowing you, I was rooting for you because I loved it because you would just slide tackle and destroy people on the soccer field. And I just loved it. You know what I mean? As many yellow cards as you got, the more a bigger fan I became of you. And we ended up living together my junior year. And dude, we probably laughed more than is legally possible, for sure, more than is biblical. But those were some good times, man.
Man, those were great times. I just think about that entire apartment or house. It's some great guys, right? Yeah. And if there was one apartment deemed most likely not to succeed, it was our apartment.
So yeah, because little backstory, Clint and I are both ministry majors. And if you go to Christian college, maybe you do, maybe you did, there's different kinds of Christian ministries majors. There's the guys that the briefcase guys, at least back when we went to college, right? They're the briefcase guys. They were very set on these guys are going to be like senior pastors. They have a briefcase. Yeah. So we barely made it through college. And what's kind of crazy about that story is you were a soccer player, but you were a Christian ministries major. But in your life and in your family, the name Dupin was very well known in the denomination we grew up in. Your grandfather, Clyde Dupin, was a world-known evangelist, pastor. I mean, he has a statue made of him, on one of these Wesleyan campuses. Like, you go and there's literally a statue of your grandpa. So if you grew up in a family that your grandpa has a statue somewhere, specifically on a college campus, I'm guessing the expectation growing up was like, Clint's going to follow his grandpa's footsteps. Your dad was a pastor. So tell me, what were the expectations for how successful or, middle of the road or exceptional? Like, what were the expectations that you felt growing up being a Dupin as far as ministry and stuff like that?
You joke around about most likely not to succeed or graduate. Like, how did we get out of there? If you remember, we were roommates on graduation. And I think the last year we roomed together at my senior year, one of my senior years. I can't remember which one. I remember getting a call from the records office. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
I didn't even know what a records office. I thought it was like vinyls, or I didn't know what is a record office. They're like, hey, we need to meet with you in the record office. This is like literally before the commencement.
Like day of or day before, right?
It was day of. And so my parents were in town. My dad was speaking, that weekend for the commencement speech and, all of that stuff. And so I finally find the records department and I sit down, or I walk in, and the woman, she's really nice. And she said, hey, you're going to want to sit down.
It's a good start.
What is going on? And she said, this is what came out of her mouth. I don't know how it happened, but you graduated. And I said, what? And she said, yeah. She goes, you graduated. Can you believe it? And I was like, I didn't know I was in danger of not graduating. She goes, yeah, by 100th of a point, you graduated. She goes, God can work in mysterious ways. I'm like, shut your face. Like, come on, right? A little. But I remember calling my parents. It's like maybe half your people have never seen Tommy Boy, but I called my parents. I'm like, I graduated. I passed. My mom's like, what are you talking about? And the lady, even in the records office, she goes, "Isn't your dad speaking like for this whole thing?" And I was like, "Yeah." She goes, "Oh, that would have been embarrassing." Anyways. Yeah, man. Like I think about that. I think about college. I think about probably more so even before that. Like I remember moving from North Carolina. That's where I grew up.
Mhm.
And it's kind of where we were based, friendships, family, everything. And then my dad coming home one day and said, "Hey, we're going to go start a church," which I had no idea what that meant. And we're going to go to Michigan, which I thought was by Greenland or Iceland. I didn't know where it was. So
Might as well be.
we go there, and he was very successful. My grandfather was very successful. And I think the narrative that, that I was picking up on, even though it was unspoken, is like, this is what you need to be doing. Even though no one ever said like, "Hey, you better be a pastor, or you better do this." Everyone always said it to me in a way of, "Hey, man, aren't you proud of your grandfather? Are you going to follow in the footsteps?" And there was never anything in me that really wanted to. But I knew that I had to perform. Like there was I needed to be a good boy, and I needed to do all those things. But it was probably my sophomore year in high school that I look back now and I just made a conscious decision. Like I don't even know if I believe in God. I don't even know if I want to, and I don't even know if it's about God. It was more about the church.
Okay.
Just because I didn't want to be a part of the church. I didn't want to be a part of, those type of things. So I knew the right thing to do was to go to a Christian private university. So, we checked out a few of those. Those were some funny stories, but anyways, the only university I got I had a small scholarship offer to play soccer. And the first year, I remember the first year I was on academic probation, so I couldn't even play. So that was just like another thing that I just felt terrible about myself, because my brother was so smart. Everything my brother touched, it seemed to turn to gold. It's like, and he was only a year ahead of me. So I'd go to, I'd in high school, I would walk into a class that he had taken the previous year. Teachers would be so excited because they're like, "Are you Chad's brother?" I was like, "Yeah." And it was within probably 2 days that they were severely disappointed that I was not like Chad. Maybe even less. But I shouldn't even act like I took a lot of courses. That they were shipping him off to college, like by his junior year, taking math. Like he actually founded NASA, right? It's like, that's where my brother was. And there's me. So there was all of this pressure, to perform. And there's all this pressure to do it. And I did not want to do it. Like I did not, it was just that tension that you lived in. Like, hey, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? I don't want to do it.
What did you want to do?
I don't know what I really wanted to do. I thought I wanted to do business. And I think anything with creating environments and connecting with people, I would have loved it I thought it would be more of my brother went down the business route. So I was like, man, maybe I'll do business. So I took intro to business, failed that, which was not a good sign.
Did you fail anything twice in college, Clint?
Do what?
Did you fail any classes twice in college?
No. Did you?
Yeah.
Well, you got to show up, bro.
I failed math twice. One time because I didn't buy the book. That was stupid. Buy the book, kids. Buy the book.
I remember walking into, this is really bad, is as a Christian ministry major, one of your key courses is New Testament. That's probably something you should know. And David Smith was the professor, great guy. I don't know if you remember him, but I don't even know if he was alive when he was teaching. But he would, you'd walk into his class and you'd walk into his class. I'd walk in and I'd say, I don't know if you were in there with me. You might have been in there with me. And I would wave to him. I'd say, "Hey, Prof, what's up, Dr. Smith? Good to see you." And then I would turn around and walk right out. What I didn't know, he was taking attendance at the end of the class. So my college coach, soccer coach, comes up to me before playoffs, is our first playoff game. And he said, "I need to talk to you." And he goes, "We're literally only 2 months in to the first semester." And he says, you've missed 14 classes of New Testament. We're only 2 months in, and the class is offered only 3 times a week. Because you missed another class, he said, you're off the team. But I just think about, like, I just didn't take it serious. I didn't know what I wanted to do until Larry Mitchell. Literally, he was Jesus in flesh to me. And he spoke into me like nobody else. He was real. He was authentic. And he said, you have gifts that can actually be real, that can be used in ministry, that can be used to lead in a different way. Because my humor was always downplayed. I was considered, and rightfully so, by my, I won't say people, but could be some family members, whatever, but that I was silly, that it was, when you do this, my professors is like, you can't do that when you get into full-time ministry. You can't. So I just was always told that whole thing was reinforced. Like, you can't be yourself if you're going to do this.
Yeah.
And Larry, honest to God, showed me a different way and was able to speak into me for a short period of time while he was there in amazing ways. And then the door started opening into different things where I'm like, I could do this. And Daron, you were, and I'm not joking, like, you were one of those people that as a peer was very influential to me as I look back, like, because we were very similar, and you used your creativity, you used your humor to connect with people. So that was something that was big for me.
Well, what I love about it, thank you for saying that, Clint. But one of the things I see is, I feel like in your case, it's ministry. But, and I talk about this all the time on the podcast because I see it as a hurdle for people all the time, is that they have a deficit of imagination. Like, there's a model they've seen, and sometimes it's a model of what it looks like to be a Christian. For some people, it's what a model looks like to be a pastor. For some people, it's just the model of, like, this is what my family does. This is whatever. And it's not that I wouldn't do something. It's not that I don't want to do something different. It's just, I can't even imagine something different, in anything different than this. I have a deficit of even being able to dream and see something different. And that's why I think it's so key. I mean, for one, you've got to discover who God's created you to be in the unique way that He's put you together. But finding people around you that see and believe more and bigger than you do. And Larry did that for you to begin to expand of, like, you know what, maybe there is a unique way that God has given to me, that, He's created me on purpose and for a purpose. I don't have to do it like my dad did or like my grandpa did. But, I love that you figured it out, Clint, because it's like, you are probably one of the most quick-witted, funniest guys I've ever been around. And that's why one of the reasons we love to be here, because we just laugh. But you also have an amazing ability to use that to pull people right to the edge of understanding of truth and of gospel. And that's, God has used that to allow you to connect with teens and young adults, and now in the efforts of what you're doing out there. But I just think how sad it would have been had you stayed in a place of, like, allowed that, that deficit of imagination to keep you from moving forward, of just like, well, I guess I'll just, and I think there's probably thousands of people that are there that just, they never met a Larry Mitchell, or they never, or however their story, brought them to place, but they got stuck because they couldn't imagine anything different.
Yeah. No, I agree. Anytime I'm in a place of presumed leadership or influence, where it's on stage, it's talking to people, it's like, if I can do this, if God has given me the grace to do this, you can do it. Right. It's like, I do think, and I don't know if you use this or not, but I do think there is such pressure on kids that grew up in homes of pastors or ministry leaders. That's almost the only route. And there's just such pressure that is put on. And I don't blame my parents for that at all. I'm not saying that, but I think that there is just this, at least I feel like times have changed. I don't feel like it's, maybe there's circles of it and there's bubbles that this still happens, but man, with my kids, it's like, I'm really trying to live a way where it's like, ministry, loving people and sharing the gospel is anywhere and everywhere. And I really believe that people that are, especially, it's one of the reasons we moved to the Bay Area, because it's one of the most influential places in the world. And 97% are unchurched. It's like, they're not coming to church just because we do a better church service than the guy down the road. It's like, the church has got to change. And we got to figure out, like, it's not about getting people to come do our thing. It's about infecting people where they are, right? And seeing that they're strategically placed. And that's what I always tell my children. It's like, hey, you're not representing me. You're not, it's not about my last name. It's not about our last names, but it's about, man, God has given you some pretty special things, special gifts. I'm even careful, Daron, I've learned this from my oldest daughter. I have an older daughter that's 26. And it's amazing to me how the younger generation articulates things like when you say, hey, you're going to be great. Because everything up to that point that I have associated with great is usually big, or a significant amount of money, or people have been attracted to it. So the message you're sending that is that anything great, man, you're going to do something great. Oh man, I better. It's like, so I'm really careful even with my vocabulary, because I love the question that you asked at the very beginning. Is like, that's what I felt. Nobody was saying it, but that's, it's the old phrase of children and teens are excellent observers, horrible interpreters. And so not until certain people came along my path to help me interpret, who I was, help me and who I was and the journey I was on, and how it can connect to the gospel and how it can connect to the greater story. And that's the power of belief, bro. Like that's when somebody comes to you and says, man, you've got something. Got something does not mean like, man, you're going to lead thousands of people to Jesus. I mean, think about that, Daron. We grew up with people's souls. We were accountable for people's souls. You talk about shame and guilt for if you didn't say the right thing, talk about the pressure. But you've got to deconstruct some of that, and let some of that go. And I just think what you're saying about the power of belief that Larry had in me, that you've had in your children, that you've had in others, man, I point to those. Those are the heroes of somebody that goes, hey, I know you're going to screw up. I know you're going to mess up. I know you're a mess up. And I like the way that you are. And I love the way you are. I'm going to believe in that. And we're going through stuff with our kids right now, man. We have 4 kids, and it's just like, I don't want them to feel shame. I don't want them to feel the stuff that I went through that nobody ever knew about in middle school and high school, because I felt like I needed to perform, drove me to isolation, drove me to things that were not good and I felt terrible about. And so I just think that, come back to your question, is like, I did feel those things, but I also know that there was people out there that God placed in my path that were so strategic.
I love that, Clint. And we know it through our lens as being, pastors' kids. And I think there's it feels like maybe there's a double ounce, a double portion of pressure, because it's like, I'm sure if you grew up and your dad's a doctor, or your dad's a plumber, or whatever your dad's career is. I mean, obviously culturally, like it's a new phenomenon that we would be like, dream up your own path. You go back, 100 years ago, it's like, if your dad was the town blacksmith, guess what? You're a blacksmith, right? And so it's somewhat new. So I think anybody who has, that kind of legacy, especially if it's multiple generations, you have that kind of pressure. I think one of the extra pressure things in the ministry context is that you're like, oh, and if I do something different, am I being somehow disobedient to God? Right? Like, because the greatest calling is for sure to work in the local church. Like that would be the ultimate, like, the super Christians serve in the church, or they become missionaries. And it's like, to get to the place of going, no, there's lots of different callings. Some people are called specifically to that, and that's beautiful, but that doesn't have to be the only way it looks. And I wish I had something more profound to say right now, but it's just, I love to watch people's journeys and just to encourage people to realize like it doesn't have to look like someone else's because God has created you uniquely. And the cool part is that he's going to be faithful to show up in your path in different ways. He's going to bring people, he's going to bring circumstances. And I think that's the thing that I'm glad for you, Clint, is like you didn't fit the mold, neither did I. And some of that is, I teach in spiritual DNA about understanding, your voice in the kingdom, whether you're an apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, or teacher. And, there's definitely an apostolic, entrepreneurial, pioneering gift, that God's placed in your life and on mine as well. And I think oftentimes guys or girls with that kind of calling, they struggle even in greater capacity because sometimes they feel rebellious. It becomes rebellious in immaturity. What it really is a desire to build on to new things, to take new frontier, to be more of a rogue, right? More of a pioneer. And I think in immaturity, a lot of times that feels like rebellion. And specifically in a church context, that's, you're seen as like, well, you're bad because you don't like to follow all the rules, but really you're just drawn to find new frontiers. That's a tough journey though, man.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. And I think, man, once you start taking those, I still remember Rob Bell talking about this years and years and years ago. It's like, repentance and confession and repentance in a lot of religious circles was always scary to talk about or a dirty word. It's like, I've done something bad, I got to repent. It's like, it's actually a beautiful thing, right? Repentance is there's a miracle that happens in repentance. And it's that you discover your footsteps, you discover your original path. And I think, man, it's like, I think we've done a lot of damage. I think the church has done a lot of good. I think the church has done a lot of damage of trying to create people to do certain things rather than teach, like, who is it that God created you really to be? Mm-hmm. And how do you walk those paths? Like, I think about my really good friend, Bill. I think about, my good friend Evan and Travis, who are principals in local high schools here, and Bill, who is in midst of, the whole science, thing going on here in the Bay Area, trying to discover a cure for COVID right now. It's like his influence is great. It's like, man, I used to have this thought. It's like, man, boy, if those guys would come work for me or the church, years ago, thinking like if something like that, I'm like, no, man. It's like they are where they should be, loving people and connecting with people. And I just think that, so many of us have forgotten the path that, maybe at one time you discovered it and you loved it, and you need to go back to that path and go, I need to be okay with this. I need to be okay with it. And I've always been in that battle, Daron. It's like, when you're in the mega church, you've been in the mega church, you can say success isn't about numbers, but it's what's ingrained in you. It really is. It's about butts and bucks, right? It's like, money and seats in the, butts in the chairs. But I think now I've really figured this out of saying, hey, I'm just going to be faithful to do what God asked me to do. People asked us when we first moved out here and before we moved, it's like, hey, what if it's not successful? And first of all, I'd say, thank you for believing in us. And then, what if it doesn't work out? What's the plan? And I'm like, there's no plan B. Like, this is plan A. There's only one plan. And I really believe in the kingdom of God. Success is in the obedience. It's not the outcome. Very, very rarely is it the outcome. And it's like, if the outcome is great, but let's be honest, Jesus's outcome did not end well here on earth. Right? It's like, but he was obedient to the call. It's like, we have to be obedient to who he called us to be.
Yeah.
And I think once we are that, the church, like, it's unstoppable. Not the four walls of the church, but the people of the church that have been infected by the gospel that changes the landscape of where they live. And like, bro, like, you look at where we're at in the Bay Area. I love the Bay Area. But when you think about 97% unchurched and de-churched population, number one in the U.S., it's daunting. And if you think it's because of your little church startup, little bleep, bleep, blah, pop up here, and that's going to solve the answer. It's like, no, heck no. It's going to be people that grasp the understanding of the kingdom, right? First and foremost, and that it goes wherever they go. Like that's what's going to change it.
And I think that's a different paradigm, right? Because the idea, like you're saying, is before it's like, hey, we're going to plant a church. We're going to get all these people here. And the best thing they could do is come here all the time and maybe even work here. And like, we do stuff here. And then that's the important stuff. And that's the greatest calling. But like you're saying, like your buddy Bill, it's like, well, no, the crazy part is that God has actually called each and every one of us to do whatever we do for his glory. And in that process, what happens is we experience like heaven comes to earth, like God's kingdom comes and his will is done. And so sometimes it's like, what is his will? His will is that we would find a cure to the coronavirus, right? Well, that's not happening on Sunday morning at a church, right? Like that's going to happen in a science lab somewhere, right? Like what his will would be that racism would go away. His will would be that kids would get educated. His will would be that human trafficking would stop, like redemption and reconciliation. Like this is his will, and we get to join him on that. But it's going to happen in your life out there, not right here. You know what I mean? Like at the church. And I love that, dude. And I love that you're seeing it happen in an area like the Bay Area. Was that a major hurdle over that to get there, Clint? Because you were at a mega church in Michigan doing great. I mean, you'd been from Michigan, your parents were in Michigan, like you're a Michigan guy, you're wearing a Detroit Tigers hat, like, and then it's like, okay, let's take all right. And that Detroit Tigers hat? Well, yeah, your head is small. It's not exactly a hat. You have to get that custom made by a tent maker, or how does that work?
Sorry, you cut out.
You were at a great church. You had a secure job. You had all the accolades. You had a lot of people saying, hey, you're awesome. And then you decided, hey, let's push reset and move halfway or all the way across the country.
Yeah.
How did someone who has been doubted, maybe even doubted theirself, how did you come to a place of belief and courage to say, you know what, I'm going to give this a shot?
No, that's a really good question. I think there was a lot of healing I experienced at Kensington. There was a lot of great leadership there. There was a lot of belief in me from Steve Andrews, which was, I think you've met Steve or you know about him, nutball. But he probably should have fired me within the first year or two. But he was able, he spoke into me on quite a different level. And partly intentionally, and some not, just by me observing him and following him. But I started to understand like the burden that God had placed on my life. It is funny. It's like burden sounds negative, but I get excited, man, about breaking through barriers. I get excited about breaking the norm and thinking outside of the box. I get excited about when de-church means people that have had a horrible experience of church, unchurched, there's like no church experience. I get excited about connecting with them, not converting them, right? It's like, there's nothing in me that wants to convert people. It's like, it's all about connecting and loving people where they are. And if I can point them or connect them to what they care about, it's the same thing that God cares about. That's what I really discovered at Kensington. And I'm like, we were a church of 15,000 people on the weekend, 45,000 on Christmas, 108 million. Anyways, I was just doing Austin Powers. Like I was just making up numbers. But anyways, I just got to that place where I was like, this is not, God has created me for something different. Not that I was angry at it. People will always like, why did you really leave Kensington? Because God really placed on my heart a love for the Bay Area. I fell in love with the Bay Area after college. When I moved to Sacramento, I'd spend all my time in the Bay Area. but I also knew it's like I could not make sense of starting a church where there are already churches. Church was still, you visited me in Metro Detroit. It's like there was still a lot of need there.
Yeah.
But there was something about, I want to go where it's more challenging. I want to go where there's creativity. I want to go where there's influence. I want to go where there's a need. And so that was something I had to come to grips with. And it was just revealed through a couple people and through prayer, is like, no, like, this is what I've created in you. This is why I want you to go do this. And you need to create the church, or you need to create that movement, whatever God is doing in you. I want you to take that to the Bay Area and be real with it. And so it just felt right, man. It felt right the whole time.
Well, what I hear, Clint, and I love spending time with entrepreneurial, pioneering, apostolic type thinkers, because the story is often so similar. Is they're in something, and I think about when Paul was in his conversion experience, and that passage where it talks about where Jesus says, "Hey, basically there's a phrase there about kicking against the goads." You know what I mean? Which is this idea the goads were like these prongs that were behind the oxen or donkeys or whatever. And is if you tried to push back whatever, and you tried to kick because you were mad, you would the donkey or oxen or whatever, the horse would kick the goads and it would hurt real bad. And I think it's funny that Jesus used that phrase. But so often I think pioneering people and apostles get into situations where, God put a burden on your heart. I think in a lot of ways what I'm hearing is he put a burden on your heart to reach people that maybe feel like you felt at the beginning, right? Like, I don't fit. This is something I can't live up to, right? Or I'm just disenchanted or disenfranchised with the whole deal. And you needed an environment big enough and dangerous enough and fun enough and creative enough to fit within and pour yourself into. But it's like, so that becomes a fire within you, something that's like, okay, I have to do this. And I think sometimes when we're afraid to launch out, it's easier to start to deconstruct the thing we're around, because it's not the thing that God's put in us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we actually cause more bitterness and more, frustration in that place, because we're just kicking against the goads of God saying, no, I've got a bigger vision. I got a bigger idea for you, but it's out there. You got to go.
Yeah, no, that's good. No, I totally agree with that. I think one of the first things I discovered, being leading East Town, the church here, is like, there was nobody to blame. You're like, well, why did they? Oh, you are they. But that's one of the things at Kensington, where I got to the place like, man, I'm not going to change this place, nor do I want to, right? It's like, it's not my responsibility. But I mean, I have such respect for leaders of organizations and entrepreneurs and startup guys that, men and women that are in that realm, because nobody has an idea. Nobody has a clue how hard it is. Not just the church, any startup. I have a different respect for lead pastors than I ever have had, doing this. It's been the most humbling experience I've ever been a part of. Man, we are too fragile right now to be disjointed. We have, the church has done a lot wrong, but they've done a lot right. And I just think that, for me, it was really discovering, like, I'm not going to do this right. I am going to fail. I wanted to go back to something you said earlier. Is the church, and I'm speaking as a leader in the church, and you are a leader in the church, is like, our job as leaders, pastors, shepherds, apostolic, whatever people, is not to get people to do our thing. Is we have to hold people very loosely. You have to see that God brings people to you for a season. And it just is the world we live in. And I think churches, if they try to hang on, try to provide programs, try to do all of these things, it's like, man, like some of the program, if God is leading you to start programs, great. But I just see too much holding on tightly to people, and it actually stunts their growth, right? It stunts who they are called to be, where they are called to go. And so I just, for me, it's like, it sounds really harsh, But in a lot of ways, leaders in the church you have to see yourself in some way as a resource to people. I love people. I love relationships. I've been burned by relationships, but people have an agenda. Everyone has an agenda. You have an agenda. I have an agenda. Even if it's a good agenda, like I want to grow spiritually, I'm going to use you for my agenda. I need to do that. So I think that pastors they fall, they fail, they burn out, they quit because they've held on too tightly. They haven't seen themselves as, hey, we live in a consumer-based world and people are coming to consume. And so I just think like my mentality here is I'm going to love the heck out of people, the seasons that they're in, but I am not, and I think I said this in our email, I am not sacrificing my family on the altar of this church plant. And so I'm going to give my best to my family. But I think if we could come back to that place and go, man, these are God's people. If God brings them here for 10 years or 2 months, we're going to love them. And that's hard here because we're in startup land. 1 of every 5 startups in the world starts in the Bay Area. 80% of startups don't even make it to year 5. So people are transitioning in and out. So if you don't take on that mentality and understanding that you're a resource and that you're going to love people for the season that they're at your place, it's really hard.
Clint, I love it, man. I would talk to you for hours, dude. And I miss you. I love what you're doing. I love just the progression of it, man. And I think that can be, and it's an encouragement to me. And I want it to be an encouragement to our listeners is that, you know, who you are today, you know, is a completely different, in some ways, person than you were 20 years ago. But at the same time, you're the same exact guy. Like the core of who you are, like you're stepping into becoming who God's created you to be, but you're always learning. You know what I mean? There's morphing, there's shaping, there's a maturation process. It's not just about like not wanting to screw around sometimes and be dumb, but it's like truly moving forward and seeing more of the heart of God shaped in who you are and how you lead. And
Aaron, can I say something real quick?
Yeah.
The head of our religion, the chair, when I graduated, called my boss, my future boss. I hadn't even started working. You probably remember this story. And he pulled back his recommendation of me. Because you were one of the top 3, when when pastors or people would call and say, hey, who do you have coming out? You and I were part of that first group, like, which was really funny that they recommended us. I was the only one. You weren't in this next category of people that they said when they sat around as religion professors, they said, did we send anybody out that we should have not? And everybody voted on Clint. And that was a really hard thing for me. You know, I use it as a funny story now, but I remember having a conversation with this professor. And I was like, I was with you for 5 years. I was with you. You knew me, you know, maybe just in your classes for 2 or 3 years, but you had every opportunity to speak to me and you never did about any of the issues that you now want to pull back on. And I told my wife this the other night. I was talking about you and I said, bro, we could hold up 2 hands each and count the people that are done and gone and have not made it. And that is not something I'm happy about or proud about. And it makes me really, really sad. But it also sometimes is like, it is motivation to say, I have to stay connected to Jesus. I am so weak. But in the same breath, I would go, I haven't changed. Yeah, I've matured a little. Hope no. But anyways, I have changed a little bit, but I am more comfortable in my skin today. And you know this is like, God can do a new work in you, but he's not going to change who he created you to be. Yeah, and so I think it's one of those things is like, I had a lot of naysayers, man, a lot. But then I remember the guys I remember most are the strategically placed men and women in my life that spoke into me at a deeper level. And I allowed them to, because I knew that they loved me and cared. And they saw something in me that only God could work through them to see.
So good, dude. So good. All right, we got to end it there because that was so good. And we're back. I don't think that's going to ever get old. I think it may be how we come back from interviews all the time because it makes me so happy. So happy, so happy. Guys, I told you you're going to like that interview. I know I did. Listening back to it makes you want to get on a plane right now. Go visit my good friend Clint. And here's what I want to land the plane with here on the episode. There's already been such good content there. I don't want to distract from that. But I loved one of the last quotes that Clint gave us there, is that God can do a new work in you, but he's not going to change who he created you to be. So good. Clint is never going to become a briefcase carrying, just straight-laced guy. He's not going to become, your cliche old senior pastor guy. And thank God we got plenty of those, but there's only one Clint Dupin and there's only one you. And God needs you to be you. And your character can develop, your maturity can develop, right? Your skills and abilities and talents, you can sharpen those, you can strengthen those, but you're going to be you. And so don't fight that. Embrace who God has created you to be, and then turn the corner. And here's where I want to end this one, is I want to ask you this, is whose destiny are you unlocking with your words? Whose destiny are you unlocking with your words? What really jumped out to me, and maybe it's because I just turned 43, and if you guys can tell, I'm so much older. I got like 6 more gray hairs right here. Nothing over here. It's right here. So I'm 43 now. So I'm looking through life with a little bit of a longer throw lens. And when Clint was talking about the impact that Larry Mitchell had made in his life, Larry made an impact on my life, my freshman year and beyond in college. Is I wonder if Larry wasn't there to see what he saw in Clint and speak that truth into his life, what would have been missed? What in the world wouldn't have happened if Larry hadn't unlocked that imagination, unlocked that belief in destiny and calling for Clint? And there's somebody in your life right now that God has put there as a person of peace in your life, and they're in your life because they need you to unlock their destiny. They need you to speak truth into their life. They need you to say, you know what, I see in you what no one else sees. And you may feel like, you know what, Daron, I'm never going to be a leader. I'm not going to be a podcast host. I'm not going to speak in front of thousands. I don't know what kind of impact I can make. Here's what I'm going to say, friend, is your impact may be on individuals, 1 or 2 people consistently through your life. And who knows? You might be here on earth just to unlock the passion, unlock the purpose, unlock the destiny, and maybe hundreds of people. They may not all be in the room at the same time. But what if you dedicated the rest of your life to say, you know what, God, give me eyes to see the potential in the people you place around me, and give me the wisdom and courage to speak truth into that purpose, into that destiny. You may get to the end of your life and be amazed. You know what? I actually helped hundreds and hundreds of people unlock God's purpose in their life just from my belief and my purposeful words. It makes me think about what Paul did for Timothy, right? In 2 Timothy 1, where he says, my beloved son, I pray for a greater release of God's grace, love, and total well-being to flow into your life from God our Father and from our Lord Jesus Christ. He's speaking truth and his hope for him. He says, you know that I've been called to serve God of my fathers with a clean conscience. Night and day I pray for you, thanking God for your life. I know that you have wept for me, your spiritual father, and your tears are dear to me. I can't wait to see you again. He says, I'm filled with joy as I think of your strong faith. He sees things in Timothy, and he's calling them out in him. And he says, it was passed down to you through your family line. It began with your grandmother Lois and passed on to you through your dear mother Eunice. And it's clear that you too are following in the footsteps of their godly example. Who has God placed in your life right now that they need to hear your words of belief, your words of confidence, speaking truth about what you see in them? You never know. Your name may be mentioned on a podcast that you don't even think about, that your words and your belief unlock the purpose and the destiny of someone that God's placed in your life. Hey, friends. Always a joy to be with you. Hope you enjoyed that episode. If you got questions, comments, maybe maybe like breakthrough things that are going on in your life, reach out to me, Daron at blackbirdmission.com, or you can text me 317-550-5070. Would love to have you leave a review or a comment on any of the podcast platforms. Like, subscribe, share the episode. Maybe you have a friend and you see their potential. You see God at work in their life and you think, you know what? They may just need a little jump start to discover their purpose. Send them a link to this podcast, and who knows, it may just unlock their life and their potential and who God has created them to be. Have a great week. We'll check back in with you in 7 days right here on the Daron Earlewine podcast. And until that time, remember these 3 things. God is for you, not against you. He's near you, not far from you. And he's created you on purpose and for a purpose. Talk to you next time, right here on the Daron Earlewine podcast.